Hi, good afternoon. Welcome back. This will be our final session on Hobbes, I promise. To myself, as much as I promised to you. Yeah, because we're behind, as you can tell. I'm going to change the syllabus either probably today or tomorrow. I've decided on what one of our topics that we have planned will have to go. So I was planning on talking with you about Kant's political philosophy. It's really interesting and has recently made sort of a big comeback in the literature, and talking about moral arguments for democracy. And I don't think we'll have time to do both. Well, we can do both, but wouldn't be doing them well. So I'd rather do one well than both crappily or half-assed or something. So what I'm still trying to settle which it's going to be. There's arguments for either. Yeah, I'll let you know. So for now, so today it'll be Hobbes, and then next week we'll do Locke. There'll be one. I'm pretty sure we'll need 3 sessions on Locke too, given what I'm learning about our pace from the first couple of weeks. So that's why one of the topics will have to go. Anyway, you'll see that coming. After that, I'll rule with an iron fist on our pace. You'll see we'll keep exactly on schedule, and yeah, I'll never make a mistake again. All right. So we talked last time about Hobbes, last 10 minutes, about Hobbes' natural right being a right to everything. We'll come back to that today. In general, I want to talk more about justice in the way that Hobbes thinks about it. Because we'll see this appear. If we talk about Kant, we'll see it appear very clearly in Kant. But also later on, when we start talking about just justice itself, these type of arguments that Hobbes is making become relevant. So remember this, right? This is the thing how we started every time. There's these 3 claims that Hobbes has to make in order to get his justification off the ground. One claim is there can't really be any moral objection to the state. It's important to him. He thinks within the state you have a moral obligation to obey the law. Pretty much come what may. It's really come what may, except if they kill you. You know this by now. And so that's an art that needs argument, right? Because it seems, at least intuitively, that we say that we have no standards of justice by which to determine whether the state is a good state or a bad state, whether the laws are good laws or bad laws, and so on. Yet Hobbes, that's what Hobbes is telling us. Right? A good way to keep in mind what's at stake here, I've invoked this 2 classes ago, I believe, is Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. Right? So he says, look, the law in the United States, this is about half a century ago, but still pretty recent. And if it was true then, it could in principle be true today. The law in the United States, he said, is deeply unjust. And, you can tell me that I ought to obey the law and just, write to the politicians and go through the court system and stuff. We've been doing that for a long, long time. It's not really, we're not getting anywhere. In any case, justice is kind of urgent, right? So if we can fix it today, we ought to fix it today. And so these laws, which themselves are unjust, they really don't call upon me to obey. Doing some violence to the argument here, but that's roughly the thrust of what he's saying. Can't wait for the law to get corrected. It's wrong, and we know it's wrong. That's why we want to correct it. So it's not binding. Right? This is hell to Hobbes, right? What a dangerous thing. Can't have this. Yes, go through the courts. Yes, petition. Yes, protest. Yeah, do all the things that you want, but you don't get to start of disobeying. So that's what's at stake. He's going to try and say, not just that you don't get to start disobeying, King, you're really making a mistake in your thinking when you invoke some standard of your own that you come up with, or that you think God has told you, or whatever else might, wherever it comes from, that you say, here's my justice, and it doesn't line up with what the state is doing. That's the most fundamental mistake. There is no standard independent of what the state is doing that tells you just and unjust. Except, of course, when they kill you. That's the get-go. So that's a startling view. It's probably, of all the things that Hobbes does, the most controversial part of his view. It's the part that people find the hardest to swallow. Yeah, he has some arguments for them, and so that's what we're going to look at. So far, so good? So you clear with? Alright, so just to step back for a moment, right? What we've done when we talked about prisoner's dilemmas and so on, we were talking about how Hobbes is offering in some ways a descriptive theory. Right? He's offering you an analysis of what the state of nature will actually look like and how people will predictably behave given the conditions. Put people in a prisoner's dilemma type situation, they will, if they're rational, right? We're more or less rational, most of us, they will start anticipating. Right? And out of anticipation, they'll start aggressing towards one another, and it'll end up being crappy. Right? That's a descriptive theory, right? Here's what will actually happen. So that's why he thinks the state of nature will be nasty, brutish, and short. But it's not just a descriptive theory, it's also prescriptive. Right? He also thinks it's morally permissible, perhaps even mandatory. Morally mandatory, he ought to do this. So reason, that's the source of all morality for him. Recommends self-preservation is the law of nature, right? A law of nature, a precept, or general rule found out by reason, by which a man is forbidden to do that which is destructive to his life. Take away the means of preserving the same. To omit that by which he thinks it can be best preserved. Right? So reason, this is the source of all morality, right? So all the stuff about the laws of nature, all the different laws of nature that I've read, he derives them, right? He's giving you arguments for how rationally, here's the beginning principle, and if you think it through correctly, there's a whole bunch of, was it 18, 19 laws of nature? You skip most of them. So. Lots of laws of nature follow from this, and that's the content of justice and morality, at least in principle. That's, by the way, that's just following the natural law of fission, right? That goes most famously back to Thomas Aquinas, who is drawing heavily on Aristotle. This is the standard way of the times to think about morality. We'll see in Locke agrees with him. He says, yeah, there's reason, there's natural law, and that's where morality comes from. Interestingly, while Hobbes completely agrees with Aquinas on this, he completely overturns Aquinas' conception of law. I can talk to you about that for a long time, but I won't. Ian can explain it to you too if he still remembers, but first we talk about it. So, Hobbes derives from this, right, from the law of nature, the first fundamental law of nature, which is perhaps surprisingly, right, that the precept or general rule of reason is that every man ought to endeavor peace as far as he has hope of obtaining it. When he cannot obtain it, right, then comes the but not always, right? And that turns out to be the thing that undoes the whole, that's the thread that undoes the struggle. But he starts, like, you have to be peaceful, right? Except when you don't. It turns out to be a lot of the time, but you have to be peaceful. Secondly, so these are the first and the second, right? So presumably, since they're coming first and second, the most important, right? Moral rules. First, seek peace whenever you can. Right? Second, then a man be willing, when others are so too, spar forth as for peace and defense of himself, he shall think it necessary to lay down his right to all things. So to give up your natural right, the right to do anything you like. Right? That's the second rule. First rule, seek peace. Second rule is, if others are also willing to seek peace, then you give up your right to everything. So you basically hand over all your weapons, all your rights, all your freedom, right? Rule 1 and rule 2 of morality. There you have it. Be super peaceful and do anything. Like, give up everything if you can get it. No price is too high except your life. Question. Is this enough to get out of the state of nature? You should know the answer to this now. No, right? Why not? See if we still have it clear.
Who goes first?
Right, who goes first? Right? What do you mean by who goes first?
Whenever you, because if you're turning down your right, saying, okay, I'm not going to kill you if you don't kill me, or I'm not going to steal your food if you don't steal my food, if you are the one not to act first, there's nothing to keep the other person from acting in that case.
Right. Yeah, so there's this prisoner's dilemma situation that's exactly what's causing the trouble here, right? The second law says, you know, you should be willing when others are also willing to give up everything, right? So now it says, like, I'll do it if you do it. The problem is everyone is in the position where they're saying, I'll do it if you do it. And of course, if everyone's in that position, it looks like we're really, really close, but we still need someone to go first, right? Everyone's saying, I'll go second. I'll go second, I'll go second. That's not good, right? You need someone to go first, otherwise it doesn't happen. So, yeah. So we've seen that. Yeah, Michaela?
I'm a little confused because, like at first Hobbes says that we need to do everything out of self-preservation.
Right.
Preservation, and if that means like killing your neighbor so you don't kill you first, then you should do it. But then it says he derives it from fundamental law of nature, which says seek peace. So.
Well, seek peace. Yeah. So that already is derived from this idea that you should self-preservation is the fundamental one, right? And so the best means to self-preservation is to seek peace, because the main threat to self-preservation is war. But it's not peace like in the like sort of the hippie pacifism style, right? Where it's not Gandhi, right? It's not like I'll, you know, the British you can come and just you point your guns at me and I'll just sit here and I won't do anything. I'm not going to resist peace. That's not what it is. It's peace if peace is safe, right? And then this worry is, this is the problem who goes first, is, okay, so I'll be peaceful if you are peaceful, right? And you'll be peaceful if I'm peaceful. But then, so I'll say, like, if you start being peaceful, I'll get peaceful too. And you're saying, well, if I start being peaceful, you'll get peaceful too. And then, like, who gets first? Who goes first?
Kind of like if someone isn't being peaceful, then we'll say, well, I'm not going to be peaceful, right? Which would, could an example of that kind of be like World War II, where, like, you want to have peace, but at the same time, like, the Holocaust is going on, and that's not peace at all, so you have war, like, part of the war is, you have war in order to have peace, kind of like that. You on the same track, right?
Yes, well, I think that's the last thing you said definitely is right, that for Hobbes, the justification for war is to seek peace. Because ultimately we're trying always to get to peace. And so in a state of nature, you and I come across each other, I want peace in a simple mind, like, straightforward sense, that I want like peace being not being attacked. And I don't know what you're going to do, so I take you out so that you can't attack me. Right? So then I have a moment of peace here, because you and I were at war, because I don't know what to do. And the same is for you. Right? And so both of us will have the disposition, if we're rationalists, to say, like, if I know that you're going to be peaceful, I'll definitely not attack you, because then I already get what I'm looking for, which is peace in the first place. But if I don't know, so I don't know whether I can trust you and turn my back to you or not, that's where the trouble starts. So I say, like, I'll be peaceful if you'll be peaceful first. But I can't wait to find out what you do first. Unless there is, we've seen last time, there's some type of external guarantee. Right? There is a huge, big, mortal god, right? A Leviathan standing next to you that says, if she flinches, I'll take her out, then I can trust you. Right? So now I'll say, yeah, sure, now I'll be peaceful.
But then there's the trouble to getting, how do you get that Leviathan, even still, because there's still that prisoner's dilemma.
Yes, so that was what we were talking about at the end last time, right? When if the problem is who goes first, then that's a problem that seems to plague ordinary interactions in the state of nature. But it also plagues the creation of the Leviathan in the first place.
Because it's like, you finally find a third person, you pick Mark, a guy named Mark, to be the Leviathan. Like, okay, Mark, now we're going to lay down all of our weapons to you. The people are like, and then Mark is sitting there all cool and chilling, waiting for y'all to give him the weapons so he can be the Leviathan, but still people are too afraid to put down the weapons because you got the prisoners on.
Right, yeah, so I'll tell Michaela, I said, like, we'll appoint Cameron here as the sovereign, he gets all the weapons.
Yeah, it's my birthday too.
If you go first.
Mm-hmm.
Congratulations.
It'll be sovereign for my birthday.
And also, trust someone not to attack. I mean, that's like going back to the hierarchy of the actions you take, like both attack, they attack, you don't attack, and things like that. Well, if you know they're not going to attack, then it seems like your best option would be to attack. Why?
Exactly. Yeah, if you don't know what the other ones are going to be doing, the best option is to attack. You should try to find and protect yourself.
Even if you do know that they won't attack.
Ah, good. Yes.
Yeah, why is it still the best option that you attack and they? Like,
Yeah, that's
if I know they're not going to attack, and I'm in the state of nature, I'm going to attack and take that advantage.
Hobbes has a name that he calls people like you.
Well, I'm just
Called the
thinking
fool.
Hobbes' fantasy state of nature.
No, it's a great question. So it's such a good question that Hobbes himself took time to address it. So Hobbes thought this is a real worry, and so, but he thinks it's a mistake, and that's why he calls you the fool. He's trying to convince his reader, of course, that you should. Hey, you want to buy my Thomas Hobbes' theory? Here's an objection that will close the whole theory. Like, well, that's a real foolish objection. You don't want to be a fool, right? So that's why he calls it the fool, right? But yeah, he says the fool. I actually have at the end. I don't think we're going to get around to it. I have a slide all the way at the end. It's a question about what's rational. Right? So Hobbes says in civil society, it's rational to cooperate because the benefits of cooperating are amazing. Right? And the downside of attacking is really bad because you're going to go to prison. Of course, that's not strictly speaking true. Sometimes we can get away with one. Right? We have a golden opportunity. You know, whatever. Like someone lost their wallet. And you look around. No camera. No one is around. Like maybe you're in Nevada or something, right? You've been driving for 3 hours to the desert. Nothing. Wallet with $200, right? And a driver's license. So you know who to return it to. Right thing to do be to return it, but of course, miles. There's no one there. You might just pocket the money. Right? It's better for you. It's an instant win. Now the honest thing would be to return it, right? But you can just cheat in this case. You just put it in your pocket. So the fool says, well, whenever I can get away with it, I'll just do it. Of course, often that's not true. Often there might be police on the corner. Sometimes people will find out, and then they learn about my reputation, and then I lose future possibilities. Because they won't trust me anymore, and so on. Like I know that, but then there's a moment, right? It's like the Ring of Gyges, if you've read Plato. Yeah. Hobbes has an answer. There was an ongoing debate about whether it's a good answer or not. There seem to be two types of rational choice going on, right? There's a kind of rational choice about getting the long-term benefits, which you can only get if you incorporate a certain disposition to just cooperate whenever circumstances will. That might be a good disposition to act. But then there are individual moments where rationally the thing to do seems to be to not cooperate. And those are just two conflicting ideas about what's rational. Now Hobbes wants you to believe that you should accept a disposition. But that's just to plump yourself on one side of the divide. It's not quite, we don't quite have an argument yet about why not be the fool. Why not be the fool? One reason that Hobbes says is you can't really hide that well. It was one reading of Hobbes anyway, it's not Plato Hobbes. One reading is that you can't hide that you're a fool that well. So people sooner or later will find out and you will lose as a result. So just let your foolishness go, always cooperate. People will see you for that, and they will trust you, and there's a lot more to be gained from that. Yeah, we're on the cutting edge here. And it's not clear even that there's a simple answer. There's just because there's two ideas of rationality that cut across each other. So, but it matters for Hobbes, right? Because if people are rational fools, like you say, then civil society won't be as stable as he thinks as he wants it to be. Right? Because the police can be everywhere, even in the most Hobbesian, Leviathan, mortal, gaudy state. Right? The police can be everywhere, and all right, here's my chance. So, yeah, it's a great question. All right. So, this seems to be Hobbes talking about justice, morality, ethics, right? What's the right thing to do? Preserve yourself. Reason. Reason is ultimately where all morality, the laws of nature, come from. Right? Right thing to do is to seek peace whenever you can get it. And it's to protect yourself whenever you have to. Right? But while you might think, right, that this is the source of morality, he thinks in the state of nature there are no natural rights, except the right to everything, right? And the argument in Hobbes's quotes, right, consisted in liberty to do or to forbear. That's a definition, right? Then he says, well, what's this liberty word? Liberty is understood according to the proper signification of the word, the absence of external impediments. So there's a definition about what it is to be free. Right? He says, but you're free to the extent that there are no external constraints, no obstacles. Right? So, in this case, in case of morality, right, if we're talking about natural rights or something of rights, to have a right by definition, right, is that that you have no moral obstacle to do it. If you remember from last time, I did distinguish between two types of rights and claims. Right? Claims, we said the correlate was duties. If you have a claim right to something, that means someone else has a duty. And a duty was the opposite of a liberty that you have. That's Hobbes's idea, right? The liberty is the absence of a duty. Duties and liberties are opposed to each other. Can't have both. Right. A law of nature, we've seen already, right? Is that by which a man is forbidden to do that which is destructive to his like, or take away the means of preserving the same. You can already see the idea of a natural right here, right? And so therefore, a right of nature is the liberty that each man has to use his own power as he will himself for the preservation of it, right? And liberty just meaning, again, no obstacles, right? So the right of nature is there are no moral obstacles to your own self-preservation. In a state of nature, there is nothing he can make use of that may not be help unto him in preserving his life against his enemies. Right? So there is nothing out there that could not be a means to your self-preservation, and you're at liberty to seek your self-preservation. So there's nothing that's out of bounds. It follows that in such a condition, every man has a right to everything, even to another's body. Right? So if there are any natural rights, if such a thing makes sense to talk about, most people think that at least we have natural rights over our own person, over ourselves, right? It's controversial whether there are natural rights. It's even more controversial if there are natural rights that we would have natural rights to property, for example, like land or things, chairs, houses, cars, money. But if there are such things, everyone thinks, well, at least you have a natural right over yourself somehow. Nope. Everyone has a right, meaning the liberty to use everybody else's body. And since the liberty is the opposition of the natural right in which I'm talking about it, the claim, right? If anyone has a claim, then other people have a duty, and nobody has a duty because they're at liberty. No one has any claim rights on nobody can say, hey, you don't get to kill me, it's morally wrong. Right? You don't get to say that, because if the other person, me being dead, might be of use to them surviving, and they have a right to try and survive. So I don't get to tell them it's wrong to kill me. Best I can do is try to kill them first. But morally speaking, that's a moral view here, right? It's not just a prediction about what descriptively will actually happen. Saying morally speaking, you're fully free. There are no moral obstacles to you killing anyone else, using their body, enslaving, whatever you can get away with, right? However you might use them.
So the implication here would be that the only thing that decides that this is not moral would be a law written by a sovereign or enforced by a sovereign that says it's not the right thing to do.
Yep. Yeah, we're going to get to that in a moment, but that's of course the punchline, right? It's at the moment that the sovereign exists, and with all the weaponry in his pocket, right? He says, "No more killing." That's the moment at which it becomes wrong to kill. Before that, this argument, right? So,
So kind of just to make sure I got what you're saying. So Hobbes believes that there are no natural rights unless there's a sovereign.
yeah, well then they wouldn't be natural anymore, right? So then they'd be artificially created by the sovereign.
And natural rights would kind kind of be considered like human rights, like a
Exactly. Yeah, just like human rights. So if you think of human rights as like innate to your being a human, or usually people think about human rights as rights you ought to enjoy irrespective of whether the government will recognize them or protect them. Right? Things you can claim against your government, say, hey, your law stinks because you're not giving me my human rights. They don't exist. Because you have a right to protect yourself. And right means to be at liberty. Liberty means there are no obstacles. And there's anything in the state of nature can be of use to protect yourself. And so because you're in this prisoner's dilemma, it follows that everything is available to you.
like what it like you know and Hobbes is arguing that anything can be of use to you. So if killing someone means that it will mean that you'll have a better chance of surviving, then you should kill them because you have a right to kill them.
Yeah.
But what if like there is no purpose to like killing them? Then would that be considered against natural life? Or
Yeah, so you might think that, so that's what this middle one is for, right? He says, like, in the state of nature, there is nothing you can make use of that may not be a help to you, right? So he says, so, you know, what's the worst so you kill me, what's the worst you can do? Well, that you're no worse off than before, right? So I was a threat, potentially at least, right? So at least, maybe I wasn't going to attack you, but then, well, now I'm dead, I'm still not going to attack you, so, right? Just as good. So, yeah, you can still get, yeah, you can, of course, now, ask yourself whether he's right. This is the argument that he's presenting. You might think, okay, I might have attacked you, but I also might not have attacked you and cooperated with you. There's a plus. And by killing me, you've lost the potential plus, right, of me cooperating with you. So there are some steps. Every step here you have to challenge, right? You have to ask, like, is this really what right means? Is this really what liberty means, right? Like, this Hobbes is not God in the sense that these definitions come down and they are for all eternity correct, right? He's making, these are interpretations and proposals. We already talked a little bit about it last time, but his conception of liberty is very controversial. So,
sounds, from a personal standpoint, it kind of sounds like everyone is just a robot, and like whatever the state says is like you're just gonna have to be murdered. Like there's no moral, yeah, like counterpoint.
Yeah.
No moral compass. You just have to trust that you're right.
yeah, in some sense that's right. In some sense, Hobbes would like it if in civil society we all sort of robotically follow the law. He thinks that's the safest thing. And you want to be safe, don't you?
But what if safe is always the right? But then that's a
Yeah, but now now you're invoking a standard that doesn't exist. That's what these arguments are trying to prove, right? Persuasively or not, right? If the conclusion is here in 5, right? So the steps that lead you to 5 are in 1, 2, and 4. So each of those steps is potentially can be true or false, right? So you have to make that up for yourself. Dominic?
Aren't natural rights for Hobbes like completely opposite of our conception of human rights? Because human rights for us are to like make our lives better in the sense that like others can't really, but for Hobbes, natural rights are just preserving your own life. So like I don't see how. I'm just kind of like I got confused there when you guys were agreeing that natural rights are like human rights because to me for Hobbes, like to me Hobbes would not agree with that at all. He'd be like this human rights concept is ridiculous. Not even the contract with Leviathan is there a human right, and even the state of nature that's even further from human rights. So
Right. Yeah, that's true.
I was
You're
just
right.
making sure that that's what was thought of.
Yeah, I think we're saying the same thing. I mean, there's a lot of terminological confusion here, right?
Yeah. I was just,
First of all, because right can mean these different things. It can mean liberty and it can mean this claim last time. So there's two very different ideas, and we're using the word right to refer to both of them, and so we got our wires crossed here.
From like the contemporary term of modern rights into like
Right.
or human rights into Hobbes thought that was like just
Right. So before Hobbes, in a state of nature, there are no such things like human rights.
and even in Leviathan.
Right, they can't even be there because before in the state of nature, there are no such things as human rights, natural rights, legal rights, any rights except the right in the sense of the liberty to do whatever you please to try and survive. And that's a weird sense of right. It's a different sense of right. It's more that just you're free to do anything. Another way, there's sometimes people saying it's all right to do anything. Now, of course, once we're in civil society, then there's rights all over the place, right? But they really only are the rights that the law gives you. So if you think of human rights or natural rights as God-given rights, or self-evident rights, as the preamble in the Declaration of Independence has it, no. Right? So there's really two rights. The right is in the permission to do anything in the state of nature, and then whatever rights the sovereign gives you in civil society, and that's it. So back to Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King says, actually these laws aren't just. They're violating people's rights, human rights or whatever. No, they don't exist. It's just a mistake, and he's just appealing to a concept that makes no sense, says Hobbes.
So the only right you have is the right to be independent, to do whatever.
In the state of nature, yeah. And then outside of the state of nature, you lose that because you give that up to the government, but then in return, the government is going to give you these more robust and safer and enforced rights to your property, to your person, to your freedom, to whatever, right? Like all sorts of. Now you have lots of rights, right? Much better, right? Yeah, Will, you've been waiting. Then.
So, jumping back just a few minutes to the bit where, so there's that other guy, living near you or something, and even if he wasn't going to attack you, if you go attack him, well, he's still not going to attack you, right? So it's safer to attack him.
Right.
But that just is making this. That's just saying attacking means that you'll definitely be not hurt and definitely won't lose or be killed yourself. So I feel like my first argument as like myself, if I was to consider that kind of thinking, I'd be like, well, it's also wrong to just kill someone. But thinking about it the way Hobbes would think about it, in the self-preservation way, it's not a great way to preserve, your life to constantly go attack things, because eventually one of the things that you're going to attack is going to kill you. So how does he address that? The more attacks and more fights you're in, the more likely you are to be killed or damaged,
Yeah, so.
That's just like, he probably, whatever, that's just your thought. Like, there's no proof there. Like, you can think that all you want, but it's like, it doesn't definitely follow that just because you fight more, you're going to die eventually. You have just as much chance of dying if you fight or not. Like, it's the same thing as, like, is the sun going to rise tomorrow? Well, I don't know, maybe. It's like, if you fight, are you going to die? I don't know, maybe. Just if you don't fight.
So he says the state of nature is not just violent, right? It's also solitary, right? So he's probably agreeing with you that if you can avoid, like if you see someone from like across the whatever the tundra or whatever, right? You see like this little like you'd probably be well advised not to get too close to them, because if you get too close to them, you probably will end up fighting, and you might want to avoid that, right? So you're going to end up spending a lot of time alone, but guess what? That's also really crappy, because now there's no division of labor, and so you really have to survive on by whatever food you can scrounge that day, right? So you might starve to death. Then suddenly you walk around, like whatever, you go into the mountains or something, or into the woods, right? You turn a corner, there is someone, right? Now it's a fight. So yeah. He agrees. Of course, we've made these qualifications before, that there can be small exceptions to this, maybe when twins, right? They grow up together, like they know each other, they trust each other, so we have the twins. Maybe parents and children can trust each other enough, the bonds of blood are maybe thick enough. Maybe we can have small groups of like up to 20, 30, 35 people. But at some point, they're going to get unstable, because it becomes slightly anonymous, and we can't really police what everyone is doing, and we can't really know everyone thoroughly. And now people start thinking like Alan was thinking, right? Like, well, what if I can get away with one? And now I'm starting to think, well, wait a minute, I don't know Alan that well. Maybe he was just raising a point. Maybe he really is that kind of a fool, right? I don't know. And if I don't know, I better take him out first. So, Tevin, you had your hand up.
Yeah. So under Hobbes' philosophy, there's no objection to the state, correct?
Morally speaking, yes.
Yeah, no moral objection.
And no rational, there's no objection, whatever, like moral, rational, any.
Like the Birmingham letter that you mentioned. I think that letter was more of an objection of the state to enforce their own laws that they created, apply equal treatment to everyone under the law, equal protection. So would Hobbes have anything to say about that situation? Like the state lays these laws out, but they fail to apply them equally to everybody. treat everybody equally, that is a fair objection, right? Because the state's not following their own laws. So.
Yeah, I think that would be a fair objection, although I think that Hobbes would still disapprove of the means that King used to try and make the objection.
But the law is on King's side, right?
It could be. It was unclear at the time, obviously. Well, maybe not unclear. It was pretty clear, I think, at the time that the law was not on his side, because Jim Crow laws were laws, after all.
American citizen, I mean, you have constitutional rights. If your constitutional rights are being violated by the state, then the state is unfair.
You might notice, is it Plessy versus Ferguson? Is that the case? Or is it?
That's one,
Yeah.
I mean, I think his point, like, federal law is probably on his side, and state law wasn't on his side. Then,
Right.
so you had the conflict, but he could make the argument for due process and.
But separate but equal, for example, was by the Supreme Court upheld,
Yeah.
right? So,
And that was 1896, I think.
right. So now, quite quickly, we're going to get into some muddy waters about what exactly the law requires, whether it's the same thing as what's actually written down in the books. It's not always obvious. But so if we go deep into what the law requires, you might turn out to be right. But there is an obvious sense in which what the law requires. If the law, you just look at what's in municipal law books, what are the police officers on the street enforcing, that sense of what the law requires, then the law was not on King's side. He was protesting those type of laws, right?
But what about any other situation, like if Congress passes legislation that could be determined as unconstitutional?
Right.
Because I don't know, I've read about some legislation that seems you could interpret it as unconstitutional in some way. So what do you have anything to say about that? Should we be required to follow the law if the law doesn't follow itself? The state doesn't follow its own law?
I think that, well, not to get too far afield, I think what the bottom line for Hobbes would always be to say, well, first of all, these are really dangerous things for the state to do, right? Because the state is supposed to create and maintain this lawful body. That is the thing that gets us out of all the chaos and anarchy of the state of nature, right? Now, when it starts messing around or not upholding the lawful body itself, it's undoing the very thing that justifies it in the first place, right? So this is really risky business, especially for the state, right? Because we put it in that position to give us a stable law, and it's doing the opposite, right? Now, if you as a citizen want to do something about it, he's probably going to say you have to do something about it in a way that is going to be at least consistent with that body being strong, the overall body being strong. So what that rules out probably is just things like violent protest or something, definitely not. Non-violent protest is the kind that King did. It's not clear, right? So King tried to say that that's one of the reasons why the letter from a Birmingham jail is really interesting philosophically. Historically, it's very interesting for obvious reasons, but philosophically, it's interesting because King is suggesting an idea about obedience that's more than just follow the letter of the law. So King is saying, I can disobey the law, but do so in a way that demonstrates my allegiance to the law. So he says, I'm going to do it openly. I'm going to announce it, right? So people know. So there's no chaos coming up. I'll do it in broad daylight. I'll readily accept punishment even. So that's his way of sort of showing that he still sees the law as having authority over him because he'll break it, but then readily accept punishment. It's like saying, breaking it and turning yourself in and saying, I broke the law, but I'm doing it in order to reform it. And so that's interesting because King is suggesting, well, this is a way for me to do everything that someone like Hobbes would want, trying to strengthen the whole body of the law, but I'm still not following the letter of the law. So I was trying at the beginning of the class to sort of create a clear opposition. Part of what's really interesting about King's argument is that he says the opposition isn't that clear. So thanks for undoing my class. No, but yeah, it's a good point, and there are lots of interesting and complicated questions there. What ultimately it's going to come down to for Hobbes or a Hobbesian is if you can do anything but obey the law, you better do it in a way that is at least as good as obeying the law in terms of keeping the peace. Right? So if you're doing it so there might be something like King, King says, I'm going to have my march. No, it's illegal to have your march. I'm going to have it anyway, right? And announce it. we're going to have this process of non-violence. They had this, this training. And it took the letter. He was in Birmingham jail because he had a march without having a permit. So I mean, and again, didn't get the permit because of the kind of march that it was, right? So, and this is part of the problem. He says, you tell me to just keep protesting, but I can't protest because I can't get the permit. So I'm going to
Vicious cycle.
right. So hence the argument. But, all right. I lost my train of thought, but I think we said it. All right. Can't get back. Anyone else? I saw Cameron. Did you have? I think I saw from. You passed. Okay. Good. Well, we got to get past this too. So, let me see. Where are we? Yeah. Here's the point, right? No injustice in the state of nature, because if in the war of man, every man against every man. This is also its consequent that nothing can be unjust. Because you have the right, meaning the liberty to do anything, there are no moral obstacles. Presumably, for something to be unjust means it goes against the moral obstacles. You have to violate some type of duty or obligation, something that morality says you can't do. There are no requirements. And if there are no requirements, there is no injustice. Better violate a requirement if you're going to have an injustice. So, where there is no common power, there is no law. Where no law, no injustice. There is your source of justice, right? You can see it coming up already. I've mentioned this a bunch of times now, but there it is, literally. All right, here's just the same argument in more common terms, right? To have a right to do something means to be morally at liberty to do it. That's a definition, a proposed definition. To be at liberty to do it means there is no obstacle to you doing it. It follows, if you have a right to do something, there are no moral obstacles to doing it. Again, these are controversial claims. Some people think you might have a right to do wrong, in which case you can have a right to do something, even though it would be wrong to do it, and being wrong to do it means there are obstacles to it, right? So these can be challenged. But Hobbes thinks, no. To have a right to do something means there are no moral obstacles to you doing it. Law of nature gives you a right to do whatever helps you preserve your own life. Therefore, the fundamental law of nature entails a right of nature, the absence of any moral obstacles to whatever helps you to preserve your own life. Right? So, no moral constraints, no duties, no obligations, no rights, claim rights, right? No rights to your body. These don't exist. The only right is this freedom to do anything. So, they're not without controversy. The principle in 4 is this claim that whatever you think might help you, right? I've actually said it too short here. It should be not whatever helps you, it is whatever you think might help you. I'm going to correct that because that's a big mistake. It's not whatever actually helps you, it's whatever you might think helps you. What do you think of that? Do you think it's, so morally speaking, you have a right to do, in a state of nature, to do whatever you might think help you? Well, ethics might, there might be an ethical rule that says don't, Dominic?
There's no objective, universal application to that, though. You know what I mean? Like, if you're going to go off of premise 4, then that's implying that, whatever any person thinks is good for them, it's good for them. They can abide by that mindset. But to me, if you're going to actually apply, a claim, you need to have at least some aspect of objectivity, some of that maybe universal. I mean, obviously we're not going to have pure objective and pure universals, but should we be striving for that? And that's completely going off objectivity. So I think.
I'm not sure I'm following what you said. So I mean, Hobbes says this is perfectly universal because everyone has the right to do anything they think would be good for them.
That's like perfectly subjective. It's subjective to each single person. You know what I mean? It's not like every person applying themselves in the same manner. It's every person applying themselves in a complete opposite manner. So like whatever Cameron thinks is good could be completely different from what I think is good, completely different from what Alan thinks is good.
Right.
And that's not universal. I mean, it's universal that we're all doing our own thing, but it's not universal that we're all applying ourselves to the same standard.
Yeah, right. So he doesn't care whether it actually helps your preservation, right, in the state of nature. That's why this is a big mistake, the way I wrote it here. it is, there's this objective truth, right, that you are morally permitted, and I am morally permitted, and everyone is morally permitted to do whatever we subjectively think is the right thing to do, or in terms of just our self-preservation.
Yeah, but like you can have like a fallacy reasoning, like if that's like the first one that you can
Oh, well, who else are you going to ask, right, in this day?
yeah, but like I can clearly think that something is good for you when it's like actually extremely harmful.
Right.
That's the first way to attack it, but I mean I figured the better way to attack it would be to say that like it's very subjective, it's not universal, like you can't apply that as a rule, like you
Yeah.
can, that's just a weak word.
No, true. So if you're the kind of person who thinks that jumping in shark-infested waters is good for your self-preservation, then morally speaking, you're perfectly at liberty to do that. Now, of course, you're not going to survive very long, right? At least if you live near sharks. But morally speaking, there might be something a little fishy about it too, right? Where you think, well, really, do we think that that's fundamentally fishy? Yeah, didn't even mean. Didn't mean to, but pretty good. You might think there's something suspicious about the idea that he says, there's nothing in a state of nature that could not possibly help you. Right? And of course, you might then, if not, there's nothing that could not possibly help you, you might think, well, this might help me, and that's good enough for you to just use it. He's saying that's the deepest rational, that's the most rational of all rational, right? That's the foundation of all morality and reason. It's very permissive, right? It allows it gives you very, very, very broad leeway to do things. It's not quite clear why that would be the thing that we're permitted to do. Anything you can think of, including other people, why would that be? Right? Doesn't give you much argument. He just says, well, there it is, self-preservation. Right? It turns out to be just self-preservation as you see it fit. But if you think that's too much, then you're doubting the properly stated moral premise here in 4, right? Again, you might also doubt the definitions of right and freedom here. If you're going to get out of the argument's conclusion, you better start wiggling with one of these claims, right? Because it's a deductively valid argument. Tyler, is that it? You just, okay. All right. We've said this a bunch of times. So why not just be trustworthy if if things are going to be so bad by doing this self-preservation thing? Just to put on the table exactly the structure of Hobbes' view, he thinks in principle you should be trustworthy, right? In principle you should be peaceful. It's just not possible, right? Third law of nature, he says this explicitly. It's just not possible in a state of nature because of the logic of the prisoner's dilemma. You can't wait to find out whether you can get away with it. It's too dangerous. Right? So here are some quotes. I'm not going to read them out to you. When I post these things, you can read them. Basically, the idea is, just because someone gives you their word, that's not really any tie. That doesn't bind them, right? Those are just sounds, and we can make them for any type of reason. We can make them because we consider ourselves properly bound, actually bound, or we can make them because we're trying to cheat you, and you can't tell the difference. You can't tell the difference. You can't trust it. Can't trust it. Walk away or attack, right? Well, either way, you're not cooperating. All right. So here's basically the argument so far, why the state of nature is a moral problem. You ought to do what's best for your self-preservation. Really, it should be what you think is best for your self-preservation. So why not just keep your words? Why not contract with others? Successfully completing with others is good for your self-preservation, right? That's a good thing. He says this. This is why you want to get into civil society in the first place. You ought to complete your contracts, whatever you do. This is the third law of nature. Perform the covenants made. But that won't get you out of it for the same reason that peace and preservation won't get you out of it. Right? You can't do your part if you're unsure about the other ones. And so this is the same quote from the last one, but he just says, look, the bonds of words are too weak to bridle men's ambitions. Right? He that performs first has no assurance that the other one will perform later, and there's your problem. We've seen this a couple times. So I'm going to race through it. So if you're unsure the other one will do the part first, you ought not to do your part first. Right? Sorry, not if you're unsure that the other one will do that part, period. You ought not to do your part first. Does Bud betray himself? Giving yourself contrary to the right. He can never abandon defending his life. So it's wrong to be the first mover in the state of nature, because it's irrational. So in principle, morality exists, but it can never apply in practice. So therefore, justice and propriety begin with the Constitution of the Commonwealth. There's the thing that we were talking about, right? So soon as the state begins, that's when justice begins. There's a section, famous section, where Hobbes makes a distinction between in foro interno and in foro externo. In foro interno, he says the laws of nature are always binding, so it means sort of in conscience. In principle, you always should keep your word. In foro externo, like in actual practice, in your activities, not so much. Only when you can trust the others. So these are Hobbes' argument for why there is no justice in the state of nature. Sure in principle, but not really. That's the point. So far, so good? Right. So he says justice and propriety begin with the Constitution of the Commonwealth. He says justice is whatever the state tells, basically, right? Whatever the state tells you. Hobbes says whenever you have a social contract, whenever we create a sovereign, you submit your will and your judgment. Here's how you leave the state of nature: to appoint one man or an assembly of men to bear their person, seen this last time, and everyone to own and acknowledge himself to be the author of whatsoever he that so beareth that person shall act or cause to be acted. Those things should concern the common peace and safety. They are to submit their wills to his will, their judgment to his judgment. So you follow, that's what he says. Whatever he that so beareth that person, so the sovereign, right? That we see as a representative, acting in our stead, bearing our persons, being our agent. Whatever he says, we will consider ourselves to be the author of. We consider it as if it were our own words. Now you might not agree with it, right? You might be like King, in my old caricature version of King. Actually, the law says one thing. I think that's wrong. Here's my idea about justice. It's that we can treat them equally, and the law does not. No, don't get to do that, right? Because when we join civil society, we submit our wills, everyone, to his will, including King. Caricature King. And their judgments to his judgment. So if you don't get to disagree, the decision has already been made. Right? There's no second guessing here. You are the author. Right? You've already made the decision. The decision is the law. There it is. So you don't get to vote twice, right? You vote once. There it is. And now you don't get to, when it comes out the way you don't like. Well, you already voted. Put up.
So does that go along with the idea of self-legislation?
Yes, very much. And that's a theme throughout the social contract theory. So yeah, maybe you're talking about Rousseau. Yeah, Rousseau picks up exactly on this. Yeah, so you think, why should you obey the law? Why should you consider the law to be just? Well, because the law is as if you're imposing it on yourself. And if it's a rule that you impose on yourself, you cannot disagree with it. Because it's yours. How can you disagree with you? It's not possible. It's internally inconsistent. And so that's why Hobbes thinks justice is whatever the state says. That's why Rousseau thinks justice is whatever the state says. Kant thinks the same thing. Locke really the big exception in the social contract theory. My God, there's like Locke. Another one, right? We've seen this last time. The great Leviathan, the immortal God. By his authority given by him by every particular man, he has the use of so much power and strength formed upon by the tyrants and able to form the wills of them all. Right? To form the wills of them all. whatever the Leviathan says, that's going to be your will too. One second, guys, go back. So, two parts to this. Why is there like no moral objection to the state? One, there is no actual morality in the state of nature. Right? There's a right in terms of just a permission to do anything, so nobody has any objections to you doing anything, including creating a state. So nobody has an objection to you if there's no moral problem. So when you create a state, there cannot be any injustice. It's just conceptually impossible. When you start talking about injustice, you start talking about what happens inside the state, and with creating a state, there is no state. So there cannot be any injustice. Even usurpers, even usurpers can, like if you're just subjected, talked about Gandhi before, you're living in India, the British come, they throw, you know, their colonial rule on you. Unjust? No. Because the state makes justice possible by providing an enforced body of law. They determine what's right and wrong, and they enforce it. That's what makes justice possible. There can be no injustice within civil society either. It's determined by the law. There is no independent standard. So, for those of you who know Aquinas, this should be, at the very least, starting. Right? He starts with the same idea of practical reason as Aquinas, self-preservation. Where Aquinas says an unjust law is no law, literally. No, justice is the law. The law is justice. Aquinas' view with the negation in front of it. So he starts at the same and he ends at the exact opposite. Right? So he's really he's trying to drive the state right at the heart of the natural law tradition. Why he's historically so interesting.
So just a question. When it comes to democracy and someone that doesn't vote, like because we vote for representatives, they make the laws, and therefore logically, sure, we put the laws, but what about someone that doesn't vote for them, or voting for someone else? Does that mean that they still are contractually obligated, even though they didn't vote for them, because of like the social contract in place? Like even though you lost, the social contract says you're going to obey the laws when they're put in place?
Yeah, that's a simple answer, yes.
Okay.
And the answer, yeah, because what you said, right? The thing that matters here in terms of your will being formed by the law is the decision to join civil society. You submit your will to the sovereign. Now notice the sovereign can be a democracy, but it doesn't have to be. It could be a king. Then you have no vote.
Yeah.
So if you have no vote, there is no way. So Rousseau takes a very different view. Rousseau thinks it has to be this constant self-legislating. But Hobbes just says as long as you just join once, right, then you just submit your will. So, okay. Michaela? Do you have your hand up? No. Sorry. No. I thought you had your hand up a second ago.
So what if you like initially you don't quote unquote sign the social contract to join the state? Can you then just say that, well, this state is impeding on my right to, keep living, so can I just come in and just, dismantle the state?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? So, did you ever sign the social contract?
No.
Right, yeah, so exactly, right? So you might wonder, like, what is this talk about a social contract? I never signed it, and so I never submitted my will, right? And so if I never submitted my will, then I'm not bound by the law, and so on and so on. This is a very Lockean way of talking about it. Next week, we'll see Locke exactly thinks about it this way. And Locke thinks that the answer to your question is yes. Locke thinks if you never join, then you're free to go by your own lights. Of course, you can't. He also thinks you can't just in a state of nature kill and pillage and roam rampant like Hobbes thinks. But yeah, but for Hobbes, no. In part, that is because what objection do you have? Right? So I'm the sovereign. You say I never signed a social contract. What are you saying? What, you're making some type of moral objection to me imposing the law on you? You don't have a moral objection because you don't have one outside of the state, and you don't have one within the state. That exhausts all the possibilities. So there are no objections like that. So you're really making a mistake there. You can't have any objection because morally you have no grounds to stand on, and rationally you're much better off for going along with me. So you're trapped. Philosophically and practically, politically, that's it, you're in.
So all these scenarios have been like the state and like an individual, or like the state and like the people the state's made up of. Does a state need to submit to a stronger state? So say that like we like as a classroom created a state, and you were like the state, you were like the sovereign. But then the next classroom over there is way bigger and has sharper pencils. Do you need to submit to them if they're like, you're now part of us? And that's how it is.
Yeah, well, so that's interesting. So Hobbes, by his own admission, and this is true for Hobbes and Locke, for everyone in the social contract, between two societies, there is a state of nature. State of nature is defined by the absence of a joint political authority that is above them. And since these are the two top these are the two top dogs, there's no third person, there's no world government, right? So we're in a state of nature between us. Now you might wonder, like, wouldn't that mean that we would like be looking at each other askance, and so us attacking them before they can attack us? Well, maybe not. Like, now, should they come and they knock me off, then your obligation is to quickly like merge into that group and form one even bigger group.
But not like in an invading way, because obviously a bigger state, if they did go to war, then that one would win. But as a weaker state,
yeah, it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
So presumably, I don't know. Hobbes doesn't talk about it as far as I know, but I can see the argument that you're thinking about. The idea would be, wait a minute, if we don't attack them first, they're going to attack us first, and we'll all be dead. Now maybe they're so strong that even if we attack them first, we still all be dead. So maybe what we do is you can't beat them to join them. So maybe that would defeat my authority in some way. It's probably true that at least internationally, there isn't the kind of rough equality that Hobbes says that exists in the state of nature among us. Like the United States and Luxembourg is not roughly equal in strength. Yes, they can crush Luxembourg. At the same time, we don't have to fear Luxembourg, so why would we attack them? That's one reason why maybe the state of nature internationally isn't that. But yeah, I can see the argument. Yeah,
when we're talking about the international anarchic system, then we're getting to more of an idea of whether you sort of buy into this idea of political realism, or you buy into this idea of political liberalism or constructivism and all these other things. Because if Hobbes is a realist, like many realists who view Hobbes say he is, then he would argue that you should go ahead and strike. But then if you think about it, if they're too big for you to actually win, like you were saying, then yes, the best thing is to give up. But I haven't really seen a lot written internationally about how it's being used to justify certain.
Yeah, there is one of the main schools in international relations theory. Realism, and it more or less departs from Hobbes. So the famous one would be Hadley Bull's Anarchical Society. That's a book, The Anarchical Society, by Hadley Bull from '86, I think, maybe '87. That's the main one. And so since then, you have a lot of other people, realists, who use roughly a rational choice type framework, like the prison's dilemma analysis that we were doing, to try and analyze in detail the way international relations work. That's all descriptive. You're asking a more individually rational question, like what should we submit? And I don't know, it could be, I'd have to think it through properly. Because we don't have the rough equality, the logic of the prisoner's dilemma isn't quite the same. Right? So why doesn't the United States just crush Belize, for example? Well, in part because the United States doesn't have to fear Belize. And the whole reason for attacking first was that you fear the other one attacking you first.
Or they have something that you want, like a resource or food, right?
Could be, yeah. Right. But
you know, they supply us some sort of resource or food or something.
Yeah, so compared to what? Compared to peacefully trying to trade with them, that might be better, right? Now, in the state of nature, you can't really wait to find out because there is this danger always involved. If you don't attack them first, they might attack you first and kill you. But when you're not roughly equal, that's no longer true. Now, Belize might know this, right? They say, well, America doesn't have anything to fear by us, so America won't attack us in anticipation. And so Belize has no incentive to attack the United States in anticipation either. So that might actually be, when rough equality goes away, the United States might turn into some sort of semi-sovereign international. Anyway, these are complicated questions that are down the street. Yeah. But yeah, it's a good thought. That's a good question. All right, 3 things here to keep in mind for Hobbes about justice, right? So 1, authority gives you an account of what authority means, right? When A tells B to do something, B sees himself or herself as the author of this, which means B must recognize A's command as if it was his own, something he ought to do. So authority here means the ability to change what others ought to do. In our case, what morally is the right thing to do. To have legitimate authority then means to have the ability to impose new moral obligations on subjects. This is something that we'll see running throughout these arguments for the state. Locke clearly makes a big deal out of this. If we talk about democracy, we see a bunch of people making arguments for why everyone voting on it somehow creates this obligation to follow the law. That's always true once it's state. So Hobbes doesn't say, we've seen this, right? That justice is artificial or invented. After all, laws of nature. But he just wants you to submit your judgment to the sovereign. The law is the authoritative interpretation. In the state of nature, we all have the right to follow our own interpretation. In civil society, that's what you give up. There's one interpretation that goes, we all have our own views. When we all go by our own views, it ends up being chaotic. So what we need is one interpretation as the authoritative one, meaning the binding one, right? The morally binding one. So justice is what the law says, because it is the authoritative interpretation of justice, meaning the binding interpretation of justice. That's just justice, right? But justice is supposed to be binding. The fact that the law settles justice is important given the function of the sovereign, because different people appealing to the different conception of right and wrong is exactly what causes conflict. Right? I mean, Hobbes' time in Civil War about who was the proper authority. But there's a moral background here. If you remember, Hampton says, Hobbes is making a moral point when he talks about the state of nature being roughly equal. The moral point being also that no one's interpretation of justice is better than the other, than anyone else's. This is a big deal to Hobbes. All right. This will be the last step. If there are no moral obligations, right, how can the sovereign create them? So, social contract, the creating of the sovereign means you renounce your natural right, which is the right to everything. To renounce the right is to renounce a liberty, to let go of a liberty. And liberty means being without moral obstacle. Those were just Hobbes' definitions of liberty and right. So, therefore, to renounce a right is to accept moral obstacles. Moral obstacles to requirements, things like duties or obligations, not to undertake those actions. To create requirements, moral requirements. So therefore the social contract involves the creation of moral obligations. That's where it comes from. Justice comes from the law because we accept, when we sign the social contract, that we give up our natural right to everything. The natural right to everything is the absence of obligations. When we give that up, we are accepting obligations. From where? Well, from the thing that we're creating, the state.
So, in a sense, kind of simple terms, could a social contract be considered like a surrender type of thing? Because you're surrendering your rights.
Exactly, yeah.
So, with that...
Absolute surrender.
So, would that mean that Hobbes believes that a surrender, like, even if you didn't necessarily sign a social contract to the sovereign, would surrender still create moral obligations?
Yeah, because what you're surrendering is this natural right, which is the absence of obligations. So you can think of this as like a double negative, right? So like, -2 times -2 is +4, right? So to deny the denial of an obligation is to affirm an obligation. So state of nature, you have no denial, you have no obligations. That's what you surrender. So you deny that you have no obligations. You just accept that you have obligations. Roughly, right? So So that's just what it means. Like, you renounce a natural right. To renounce is to divest a liberty, right? Just let go of a liberty. Liberty means no obstacle. Right? So you let go of no obstacle. Right? So you have no longer no obstacles, which means you have obstacles. Am I going too fast?
Oh no, it's just a lot of like, you know, a lot of errors.
There's double negatives here, which tend to be confusing. But, since Hobbes thinks about the state of nature in negative terms, like the absence of stuff, the absence of morality, to create morality, we have to let go of the absence of morality. So that's the surrender part. You're giving up on there being nothing. You're creating something.
So, would Hobbes also agree that, let's say, I get married, I have a kid in this civil society. This kid does not have to renounce his right. Automatically, he renounces his right by virtue of the fact he was born in a civil society.
Yes.
All right, gotcha.
Because he can have no moral obligation to this being the case. And it's rational for him to do so. What more do you want?
Right.
That's Hobbes' theory.
Okay.
Those are your three factors. Here's a quote. Anyway. The one thing, of course, to keep in mind, I said absolute surrender, but it's always absolute but. Right? But not absolute, because there's always the right to defend yourself. It's absolute surrender, except if absolute surrender means they're going to kill you. Anyway, we get back to this. Finally, really quickly, three things. Why should we care about Hobbes? What have we learned? One is he gives you a method for justification. This is the point I've just been making. He's comparing the state to the non-state situation, isolating the variable. It's a state of nature as a thought experiment. It's instrumentally rational and reasonable, morally speaking. Notice here then that he's saying that even though the social contract was not actually signed, like your kid doesn't actually sign the social contract, Malik's objection, right? No, INAC was signed it actually. Hobbes thinks that the argument, thinking about the social contract, is something that might happen, that would be rational, and to which there would be no moral obstacle. That justifies. And that's what Nozick said, right? Hey, we can think about social contracts and state of nature as something that never happened, and yet it teaches us something. So that's what we're kind of seeing here. Prisoner's dilemmas and the function of the state. Well, we talked about prisoner's dilemmas till the cows come home, so you can do that. One important thing here, Hobbes thinks that the state is having a particular function, which is solve the problem that reasonable people, rational people disagree and not fighting because they're reasonable. And so the state is this type of thing that does stuff that we individually cannot do. It's this collective solution to individual problems. That for Hobbes is a big deal, Hobbesians. Individually, we cannot exit the state of nature. We cannot live together peacefully. So we need something that's not comprised of individuals, but an immortal God, or the Bible, to overcome these problems. Any questions to end? All right. Hope you're happy. Again, I'll leave just, All right, guys, see you guys next week on Tuesday. I'll update the syllabus tomorrow.